This is about to be live, by the way, so if you need to pick your nose or something.
I stopped hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is we're now live. This is Zoom, so don't pick your nose unless you want everyone to see.
Okay.
Okay, can I try sharing my slides?
Yeah. Oh wait, let me make you a co-host. There you go. You're a co-host now.
Okay.
This is live, Robbie.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Does it show up widescreen?
It appears to be widescreen to me.
So you see the whole word Racket and 2020.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, let me just make sure that this all looks. Okay, everything looks good.
Cool. You stopped sharing your screen, right,
Yeah,
Sam?
I'm aware of that.
I'm going to be muting myself here to make an announcement on Gather.
Okay, I'm sharing again. Hopefully people can see that. Robbie, can you see the, just want to check that.
I just realized that I've been talking and I was muted myself. So let me start again. Now we have the numbers of people on Gather matching the number of people on the live stream. So I think that we're ready to get going. So welcome everyone to the first day of RacketCon, so the second day of RacketCon. This morning we'll have two sections. So we'll have the State of Racket by Sam, and then after that we'll have a Racket Town Hall. And the goal of the State of Racket is to, hear about what's going on in Racket generally. And we'll have questions for Sam in that. You can put those questions in the live stream on Gather, or directly into the document that the link is on Gather. And then after that, we'll sort of smoothly move over to the Racket Town Hall, where I have all of the members of the Racket management team on this Zoom call, and we'll all answer questions from the community and talk about what's going on generally, broader than just what Sam talks about. So thank you all for being here, and I'll introduce Sam. So you should all know Sam as Mr. Type to Racket, and he'll be taking care of the State of Racket talk this year. So take it away, Sam.
Thanks, Jay. It's an exciting moment for Racket every day when we get to sum up what we've done in the last year, and in some cases in the last many years in this talk, and talk about some exciting things that people are working on coming up next, and take stock of where we are as a community. So feel free to ask questions, and I'll try to answer whatever ones of them we get to are available at the end. So let's get started. First, this year is Racket's 25th birthday, and while we don't get to be together to have cake in person, we get to celebrate our 25th anniversary. Matthew and Matthias wrote a very nice blog post about the beginnings of Racket in 1995, starting with their ideas about integrating different languages, building a student-oriented IDE, and transforming education for introductory programming. All those goals, I think, have been clearly achieved, and Racket is a much bigger success than anyone could have hoped for 25 years ago. I've only gotten to be a part of the Racket community for 20 years, but it's been an extremely enjoyable journey, and I look forward to the next 25 years. So in this talk, I want to talk about three different areas. I want to talk about the code of Racket, the community of Racket, and what's coming up in the future. And Racket is both a software project, but also, and even more importantly, a community of people that are part of this conference, but also part of everything that we do together in Racket. So to start off with the code, here's the amount of C code that was shipped with Racket 5.0. Back then, we didn't call it Racket BC, but that's the version. A count that I did this weekend suggested that it was 425,000 lines of C and C++ code, or thereabouts. It's always hard to be exact with these figures. Then by Racket 6.0, about 175,000 of those lines had disappeared. That was almost all in the rewrite of Racket GUI to be a Racket program rather than a giant C++ program. Then in Racket 7.0, we had made a little more progress. The Racket macro expander and module system was rewritten in Racket, and that shrunk significantly more than 5,000 lines. But between Racket 6.0 and Racket 7.0, lots of new and exciting features were added to Racket, and other things were improved, which contributed to the increase in C code. Here's what it looks like if you download the default Racket CS snapshot today. About 50,000 lines of code that will get built on my Linux machine. That change is a result of the move to Racket CS, where the compiler, many of the primitives, and enormous amounts of runtime support have been moved to Racket code and to scheme code. One thing that's worth noting that makes this bar even smaller is that recently Matthew rewrote a big part of the Shea scheme garbage collector as a scheme program that generates a C program just to keep these bars getting smaller. So this is an enormous improvement in Racket, both because no one really wants to maintain C code, and I'm confident that I speak for Matthew in that, and also because it's just so much easier for everyone to contribute to the core of Racket now that these systems are no longer written in garbage collected, pre-processed C and C++. So that's a big improvement in the state of Racket. That's been made possible by the move to Shea scheme as the backend. And since the last State of Racket talk that Matthew gave a bit over a year ago, there have been a lot of major improvements in the Shea scheme version of Racket. One big one that's worth noting is that every test we run in continuous integration, which takes about 20 hours of CPU time, now passes on Shea scheme. That's a huge effort by everyone who contributes parts of the main distribution and packages that it depends on to get the boxes that you see that are empty to have 0 test failures. So that's been a big change that has made the Shea scheme backend for Racket now a production-ready version. There have been a bunch of other improvements. So now Shea scheme will unbox floating point numbers, which significantly speeds up computations that use them. The Shea scheme backend for Racket now has incremental garbage collection, and it now very recently has a partially parallel garbage collector. As a result, the build of Shea scheme from scratch now takes less time than the build of the BC backend of Racket. Another area in which Shea scheme has improved is startup performance. Here's timings taken yesterday. You can see that Shea scheme is now just a little bit slower in starting up than Racket BC. These times are in milliseconds, and we're now very close to where we were and with Racket BC, even though this is the part of Racket on Shea's performance that has suffered the most from the transition. In runtime performance, here's the benchmark that was the worst when Matthew last presented the state of Shea scheme's performance. And now the Shea scheme backend is faster than the BC backend. The other two that were at the tail end of performance are still haven't caught up to Racket BC, but they're significantly faster relative to even where they were 6 months ago. So Racket on Shea continues to improve in performance in the areas where it was weak and to continue to be extremely effective at the areas where it was strong. Racket's also moving forward onto new platforms. Apple's coming out, as you may have heard, with a new ARM-based CPU, and you can already use ARM-based CPUs everywhere from AWS to Raspberry Pi. And Racket now has, in both variants, a backend for AR64, as it's called, which will enable us to quickly release versions of Racket for all of these platforms when they're available. Racket has a new continuous integration system spearheaded by Paulo Matos, running on GitHub Actions. We're now, as you can see on this slide, running a dozen different kinds of continuous integration, ranging from sanitizer testing to code static analysis, to builds on multiple platforms, to Docker image creation, to building downloadable snapshots on every platform. So Paulo has made a huge improvement to our CI that runs faster and gets more done for every commit and pull request that you make to Racket. This has also been done for many other parts of the Racket distribution, and we're happy to help people who are looking to do this for their Racket packages as well. Should also mention that a lot of this has been made possible by Bogdan Popa's GitHub action for installing and setting up Racket that makes much of this very easy. Another big improvement, also that I'll credit to Bogdan, is improvements in the performance of the Racket web server. Racket web server is a powerful and convenient way to build web applications, as we heard from Brian's talk yesterday, and we're continuing to improve its performance. Here's a graph of response times. Pink is before the change that Bogdan made, and blue is after. You can see lots of big spikes of slow performance that will contribute to latency in web applications that just totally disappear. There's been other big performance improvements, some of which reduce 99th percentile latency by sometimes up to 100 times. So performance of the web server and its ability to serve high quality web applications continues to improve. Another important application in the Racket community is Typed Racket. And Typed Racket has recently developed powerful new features for supporting one of the fundamental features that makes Racket an extensible and powerful language, structure properties. Fred Fu, also hanging out here at RacketCon, developed a new system for supporting structure type properties in Typed Racket that is available in Typed Racket today and available in the next release. Now I want to talk some about the Racket community and where the community is and where we're going. One big thing that we've done as a part of the community is a new version of the Racket webpage. This was built in large part by Matthias Fleisen and Robbie Findler, with lots of contributions from many other people. The new webpage really highlights Racket's support both for general purpose programming as well as for language-oriented programming. Another big change in the community is we've added several new maintainers to packages in the main distribution. Alex Harsayani has taken over maintaining the plot package, and Pavel Pancheka and Jens Axel Soegard have taken over maintaining the math package. Those are two packages that get a lot of use and were unfortunately under-maintained at the moment due to the departure of their previous maintainers. We're really happy that they've stepped up and significantly improved the maintenance of these packages, and it's great to have new people leading in the community. Another exciting thing that's been happening in the Racket community is competitions, many of which have been organized by Stephen DeGabriel. So the Standard Fish competition and the Quick Script competition have produced tons of excitement and energy, and also some great pictures, as well as exciting scripts that can do everything from help you with your source control to opening links from Dr. Racket. We continue to increase the amount of throughput in the Racket repository. Here's a count of pull requests merged across the entire Racket organization by year, or by year since, by the year prior to right now. So in the last 12 months, we've merged 525 pull requests across the entire Racket GitHub organization, which is a big increase since 2019. And as you can see, going back, this number is just going up and up and up. So we're continuing to increase the number of people contributing and the amount of contributions across the Racket community, and we want to keep going in this direction. We're also continuing to try to stay on top of issues reported. You can see we're managing to close more issues. If you want to help stay on top of the large number of bugs and issues in all of Racket software, I encourage you to join the #triage channel on Slack to help out. The number of contributors, or unique contributors, this is just counting the Racket repository, continues to go up slightly more slowly, but we want to continue to increase the number of people contributing. And that's one of the big gains that we're getting from those shrinking lines of C code that I showed earlier in the talk. Another big initiative that we took in the community was the Racket survey, trying to figure out how we can help people contribute more and participate more in Racket as an amount of code and as a community. And again, I want to thank Stephen DeGabriel for organizing this. We got 422 responses to this survey, which is about 4 times more than I expected. So I'm extremely grateful to everyone here and elsewhere who responded to this survey and shared your thoughts and your feelings about Racket. So I'll just go over a few of the interesting pieces of data from the survey, and we'll try to share more information from it in the future. So here's some numbers about who responded to the survey. 339 people who are currently Racket users, 61 people who've used Racket in the past but stopped, and 22 people who've never used Racket. I think it's particularly valuable to get feedback from people who used Racket in the past but stopped to find out what caused them to leave the Racket community. Here's a perhaps unsurprising distribution of where people are using Racket, primarily on Linux, but secondarily on Mac, and then Windows and BSD continuing to hold up. Although, as you might expect from the BSD community, there's a wide variety of different BSDs represented in that 13. Here's another interesting fact about the Racket community. Many, many people have been in the Racket community for a long time, more than 3 years. But unfortunately, in the smaller amounts of time, the numbers are pretty even. So we're bringing in lots of new people every month, but many people are not sticking around, and we're thus in a situation where the community is split between people who've been here a very short amount of time and people who've been here quite a while. And so I think one lesson is that we need to figure out more ways to keep people in the community once they join and get excited about Racket. Here's who it is that was taking the survey. These numbers are bigger than the will sum up to more than the number of survey responses because people could check multiple things. About half the people described themselves as professional developers. About a quarter of the people were researchers, either in computer science or something else. People also described themselves as self-taught racketeers, students, teachers, lecturers, professionals in other industries, and a number of people even described themselves as parents of students who were learning Racket. Many other different, there was a long tail of other interesting descriptions as well that I've omitted here. What editors do people use? Always the most fun topic for debate. Again, these add up to more than 422. Dr. Racket continues to be the most popular editor in the Racket community, but Emacs and Bracket mode, thanks to Greg Hendershot, is a strong addition. We also have a lot of Vim users, so I think there's an opportunity to figure out how we can consolidate and improve the Vim experience for Racket. And then there's a strong contingent of VS Code users, hopefully being served better now with the addition of Magic Racket. We also asked people how we can make contributing to Racket easier. And here's just a selection of some of the answers. People were looking for easier ways to find out how to contribute to Racket, how to find where the code they might want to modify is. People also wanted to know what was needed, where could their work be helpful, and how they could get guidance and mentorship to start on their process of contributing to Racket. There were also lots of comments of people who felt like they didn't have the skills necessary to contribute to Racket yet. Racket was extremely technically deep and impressive, and we need to figure out how we can both help people get over those barriers and realize that contributions from a wide variety of people with any level of skills are valuable. People also wanted more guidance on how to work with the Racket repository, running test suites, getting an appropriate repository and working there. So those are all ways in which we can continue to make it easier for people to move from being excited about Racket to being a contributor to Racket. Now I want to talk a little bit about what's coming up in the Racket community. We've talked about making Racket CS the default version of Racket. And when is that going to happen? So our current plan is that as soon as we have a release where we don't find any really terrible bugs in Racket CS, we will make Racket CS the default. So that could be as soon as the 7.10 release, which is coming up in approximately 3 months. We've got, the current release, we did find a number of unfortunate bugs, so it's definitely not going to happen in the next month. One other important note is that when we release Racket CS as the default, we plan to name that Racket 8.0. And that'll signify the big improvement and changes in Racket as we've moved from Racket BC to Racket CS. That doesn't mean that it's going to involve any more backwards incompatible changes than Racket CS has already involved, but we're going to indicate with Racket 8.0 the big improvement that we've made. Another big development that's in the works right now is called transient typed racket. Ben Greenman has been developing two new languages as variants of typed racket, which he calls shallow typed racket and optional typed racket, that will change various ways in which typed racket enforces the types when communicating between typed and untyped parts of your program. The goal of this is to support more different ways that people want to use typed racket and to reduce the performance overhead that typed untyped communication can impose, so that typed racket can be used more like TypeScript or more like a system where you can get fewer optimizations, but also slightly fewer guarantees from the checks. And then finally, the other big thing that's a continuing project in the Racket community is Rhombus, formerly known as Racket 2, which Matthew talked a lot about in the State of Racket talk last year. The biggest thing that's happened for Rhombus is a lot of discussion. There's a Rhombus brainstorming GitHub repository with a lot of pull requests and plenty of place for people to discuss directions. I think there's been two sort of accomplishments so far as part of that. First, identifying goals for Rhombus. And here are the goals that you can see if you look at the goals file in that repository. They are making operations more generic, making various parts of the language more consistent, reducing barriers to entry coming from other programming languages, coming from not programming, figuring out how to make Rackets take on language extensibility that we all love, applicable to more kinds of syntax than just Racket, and figure out which changes we wish we could make to existing Racket that would be backwards incompatible, like changing some parts of the behavior of structs that are beginning to show their 25 years of age. The other big thing that's been developed as part of this brainstorming repository is the shrubbery notation, which is developed by Matthew with lots of feedback from other people commenting on that repository and building on other people's work, such as Jay's and Tony Garnick Jones's. So here's a few examples. Here's the identity function. Here's the Fibonacci function. And here's a slightly more complicated function that uses match. Now, these are all just simple examples. They're not running code yet, although there is a reader for them. And one of the things that's distinctive about shrubbery notation is that it works a lot like Scribble in that it's a non-S expression syntax that turns into an S expression or syntax object data structure, and that it's then processed in the way that we know and love in Racket. So it's a way of going from a non-S expression notation to syntax objects that work the way we expect. And here, in fact, is the S expression that results from that Fibonacci function. You can see that it's slightly less structured than what you would get if you read in the Fibonacci function in Racket, hashline Racket syntax. But you're still going to be working with this in the familiar S expression way once it goes from concrete syntax to syntax objects. And macros are still going to be a big part of this language in much the same way they are in hashline Racket. But Rhombus, as you can see, is very far from done. And what we need most is contributions from people who want to help achieve those goals that we listed. That involves making suggestions, participating in discussion, leading efforts to figure out which changes we want to make, how to make the language more generic, more consistent, more approachable, and easier to understand. So there's lots of opportunity for you to, and everyone else, to shape the future of Racket as part of Rhombus. With that, I'm done. Racket continues to be moving fast and running off into the next 25 years. And 2020, for all that has led to us being in a virtual RacketCon, continues to be a great year for Racket as a community. And I'm happy to have presented the strong state of Racket today. Thank you.
Excellent, Sam. So we'll now move to questions both to Sam and to anyone in the Racket management group. So there are a few questions that have been written in the Google Doc. And if you have more questions, add them in or type them into the live stream or the Gather, and we'll move them to there. So first one is, so you talked about a few different places where people can contribute. What would you say is the one that is the place where we need the most help?
I don't think there's any one place where we particularly need the most help. It really works best if people start contributing with the part where they're excited about and the part where they want to be a part of the community. So whether that's writing new packages, triaging issues, discussing how to make Rhombus more generic, or contributing new type recovery analyses like we heard from Gustavo's talk yesterday, all of those are incredibly valuable contributions. One thing that I didn't mention that I do think is an extremely valuable contribution that everyone can do is writing about Racket. So if you have a place where you can write on the internet about your experience with Racket, how Racket helps you do something that you're excited about, whether it's write a game, write a web service, do your job, do your schoolwork, or just have fun, communicating about Racket, about why you like Racket is an incredibly valuable thing for the community and shares knowledge with everyone in a way that we can all benefit from.
So next question, with the recent overhaul of the Racket code base, in particular, you talked about how there's only 50,000 lines of C code now. What's the current thinking and perspective on alternative backends? So particular people are interested in Picket and going to JavaScript or WebAssembly. And you might want to remind people what Picket is.
Yeah, so I think the big answer is that going from 450,000 lines of C code to 50,000 lines of C code is an enormous enabler for new backends. And this is true in a few different ways. So one, it's made it less work to create the new backends that I mentioned, like the AR64 backend. Another is that it makes it easier to create whole new versions of Racket backends at a higher level. So I've been involved and developed the Picket backend for Racket, which thanks to the work that was involved in moving to Racket on Shay, is now able to leverage almost all of that new code written in Racket that replaces C code to build the Picket system, which is a tracing JIT compiler for Racket. So because of that work, it was much easier to build a new backend for Racket. Something like WebAssembly, which I think is one of the most important backends we could add for Racket, is again made easier by the move to Racket on Shay. I think the right solution there is to figure out how to generate WebAssembly as a Shay backend, and then we can just reuse all of the higher level infrastructure there, everything from the garbage collector to the expander to the IO system, and have them all work on top of WebAssembly just by changing the code generation portions. And if you're excited about writing WebAssembly generating programs, then I'd love to talk to you about that and making that happen.
So you mentioned that there was a plan to have CS be the default in the very next release, but there were some errors that made it so that we couldn't do that. So people are curious about what those errors were and whether or not there's any advice for how they could find similar errors in the future.
So I can let Matthew speak to some of them, but the advice for how to find them is run your Racket programs using Racket on Shay. And when things don't work, then let us know and report bugs. And that's by far the best way to do that.
Jay, may I please jump in?
So I've never known you, Matthias, to raise your hand on anything. So I just assumed that you were waving to someone who is off screen. So sorry for not noticing that before.
I always raise my hand for the last 30 minutes. I would like to supplement something to supplement Sam's response to the previous question. Stephen Chang at UMass Boston is running an effort called Racket Script. At the moment, you compile to JavaScript on your machine and run it as Racket Script in your browser. But of course, we'd like to get to self-hosting. It is not exactly Racket, but it's almost Racket. And I encourage everybody who is interested in a JavaScript platform before WebAssembly realizes all of our dreams to get in touch with Stephen and push this effort forward. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so another question.
Well, I want to let Matthew finish answering the previous question.
Oh, sure.
The specific bugs that we found in CS, one of them was if you iterate over a hash table with more than 32 elements, it would just stop at 32. So that was easily the most serious one. And maybe there should have been a test case that tried a larger hash table like that, but that's the kind of thing you find quickly when lots of people run their code in Racket CS. Other bugs were things like when you do read line and a carriage return new line happens to be right at 2 to the 16th bytes, and you're reading in any mode. You know, it's that kind of bug, things that are serious for individual programs, but things where we need a lot of people to run a lot of programs to find those last little mistakes.
Cool. Okay. All right. So someone asked the question, would it be good? So you mentioned competitions earlier and how those competitions were a useful part of the community. Someone says, would it be a good idea for the Racket team to organize these competitions themselves? For instance, like a documentation competition or some other sort of competition that the Racket team would organize?
My feeling is we've had some great competitions that Stephen's organized, and I encourage people who want to build something like that to take it on themselves to start that. If you would like help, infrastructure, or any other sorts of assistance, then I'm sure we're happy to do that. But I can't imagine that we would be doing a better job than what's been already happening.
I would like to add a proposal to Sam's answer. Our community has something called vignettes that describe ways of entering our universe for certain use cases. I think that would be equally useful for Racket, and users are better at writing them than the core team.
Cool. I think that when Sam was answering, Robbie and I and Matthew were all shaking our heads. Yes, like we very much agree that there's no reason that everything good has to come from the Racket team. We think that the Racket community is way better at us than many, many things, and that's wonderful. And like Sam said, if you want help, in particular, if you want advertisement on the webpage or something like that, or on the Twitter, all of those things are something that we would be very happy to do. Okay, so another question. Someone asked the question, how do I get into contributing to Racket? How do I figure out what to do? What kind of merge requests will get accepted? So you mentioned, all the pull requests that we've accepted lately, but there are lots of pull requests that haven't been accepted. So how do people know what they should do?
So I think pull requests, if what you're wondering is, I have this idea for changing Racket, I'm curious whether it would be received positively, then opening an issue and asking, or posting on the mailing list and asking, are both good ways of doing that. There is indeed a backlog of open issues and open pull requests that we continue to try to work through. And one way that you can contribute, if you don't want to write new ones, is to help go through those, identify the ones that are ready to merge, or that have issues that have been fixed, or issues that need more information, and help with those. But then there's another question there, which is how to figure out what to work on. And I think that's a trickier issue. There have been a bunch of bugs labeled with good first issue. So those can be a useful place to start. But I recommend, and you can also take a look at existing pull requests, existing issues, but in some ways, there's no substitute for figuring out which things you're excited about and trying to get involved there.
Great. Someone asked the question, have people, okay, so the things moving into the cloud are very popular. So for instance, Docker and AWS Lambda, people are curious about whether there's any effort in that in the Racket community.
So Docker and AWS Lambda are two pretty different systems. So thanks to Jack Firth, there's a bunch of Racket Docker images. Those are built and tested regularly, and there you can just pull them for lots of different Racket releases and use build your Docker image on top of those if you're using Docker to run Racket applications. In terms of AWS Lambda, it's certainly a viable platform for running Racket applications, but I don't think anyone has yet built anything to make it easy to use AWS Lambda with Racket or any of the other functions as a service, despite the synchronicity between Lambda and Racket. that doesn't exist yet. So that would be something that I'd be very excited to see someone create.
So one of the 13 BSD users is curious about how to get the package source package for Racket up to date, because right now the current version is 6.12. So consider this a call to those in the BSD world to try to get that updated.
Yeah, so maybe someone else knows more about the situation there, but certainly I don't.
Okay, so someone says, you mentioned mentoring and making it easier to contribute. Are there any specific plans for how to improve these things? And I think you mentioned this, but maybe just talk a little bit about it again.
So I haven't made any specific plans for setting this up. I think this would be something valuable to have. And that's definitely one of the things that comes out clearly in the results of the survey. I think as we go forward, that would be something that's valuable to add, figuring out which issues we could provide mentoring to help someone develop a fix for example, and other ways in which we can bring people in from community member to contributor to maintainer, and how people can continue to move up that. But there's not anything set up yet, but I hope that that's something we can do.
Cool, okay. All right, so there's no more questions on the list. So if people have more questions, that would be great. If not, I propose a question to each of you, Matthew, Robbie, Sam, Matthias. What is like the thing that's happened in the last year of Racket that has most personally excited you?
Well, we've already talked about a lot of the things, and I think the contests and the Matthias mentioned vignettes. I think there's been an effort to make sort of like, here's sample programs for Racket that do typical kinds of things, that kind of documentation. Seeing that kind of stuff emerge has been the most exciting to me.
It's basically true for me too. Seeing the community sort of things start to happen in the community that I'm not aware of until maybe almost they're over has been like amazing. Also that graph that Sam showed, I hadn't seen that graph with the number of lines of C code. That was pretty cool.
So for me, I think the survey and the incredible response that we got for the survey and the number of people who are excited about Racket and excited about contributing to Racket, I found that incredibly exciting.
I agree with all of what these people said now, but I would like to point something internal. I have watched Ben Greenman put together Transient Racket and coming up with performance numbers that, at least in principle, don't exceed 10x performance hits, which is about 3 or 4 zeros better than what Type Racket does for us in BAT programs. And that is a good step forward to get the idea of partly typed or partially typed Racket programs. And I encourage everybody to look to the last talk and attend. Ben's effort deserves more support. And if you can use Transient Racket in the near future and give him feedback, that would be fantastic.
For me, the thing that I've been most excited about is I've always felt like a failure when I look at web server benchmarks because I got like really bad numbers and I tried really hard to do a bunch of things. I just could never figure anything out. And then Bogdan came and he basically swooped in and found all of these problems and all of ways to improve the web server performance. And it's greatly improved. And that's been really great for me because, I mean, in some ways it makes me feel like more of a failure because why didn't I figure it out? But on the other hand, it's great to see the high performance of the web server. And that's been, that's something I've cherished. Well, okay, so we have no more questions. So we'll now return to the gather. So recall that our next session, I'm just double checking the time, will be in about an hour and a half, 12:30 Eastern time. And yeah, and that's going to be Jesse and Peter Zhang. And yeah, so I'll make an announcement on the gather shortly before that time. See you all soon.
So, and one more thing to mention is we'll all be in Gather if you want to chat with us there about any of the stuff that we've talked about or anything else related to Racket.
Yeah, of course. Okay, see you all in Gather.